Well, good evening, everybody. Great to see you all here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm David Brashear. I'm the director of the Muscarelle Museum, and it's great to have you here for one of our presentations in our intersection this fall semester between environmental issues and art. So I want to remind you, if you have not seen our exhibition, Vital, Our Irreplaceable Earth, that is upstairs for about one more week, and then it will be going hopefully to another venue. We haven't figured out just exactly where it's going yet, but we're working with our friends at Vital Impacts and at Conservation International so that this great exhibition can have a few more lives before it's put to rest. As you know, our Muscarelle Explorations sequence this fall has been all about that intersection between the environment and art and how we can use one to help the other. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to sit down with my colleague here at William & Mary, Professor Alan Braddock, next week to talk about a book he wrote called Nature's Nation, or edited, I'm sorry, American Art and Environment. I didn't want to give you too much credit there, Alan, sorry. And that'll be here in our event hall at the Muscarelle next Thursday at 5 p.m. I hope you'll come and join us. The following Thursday, we'll be doing a film screening of the very special film, My Octopus Teacher, once again in this sequence in our Year of the Environment. And then we'll wrap up this really great fall effort with a presentation by the artist Sto Len, and he'll be talking about reimagining the hydro commons, as he calls it, ecological art practice as a collaborative movement. That's going to be Tuesday, November 18th, here at 5 p.m. in the event hall of Muscarelle. But we have something really great going on this evening. Xavier Cortada was born in Albany, New York, and he's the son of Cuban exiles. At age 3, not surprisingly, his family moved to Miami, and he spent much of his life in southern Florida. He holds 3 degrees from the University of Miami, and you may not expect what these are going to be: a Bachelor of Arts, a Master's in Public Administration, and a law degree. He's a lifelong agent of education and change and has used his voice to bring attention to both social issues and environmental issues. For the last several decades, his focus has been on the intersection of art and ecology. His work aims to address and generate awareness and action around climate change, sea level rise, and biodiversity loss. His efforts in the areas of coastal resilience are particularly close to William & Mary's own efforts at VIMS and the Batten School of Marine Science, and so it's particularly great to have this confluence of great forces of thinking here. In 2007, Mr. Cortada was a National Science Foundation Antarctic Artist and Writers Program Fellow and embarked upon a number of artistic projects related to the impacts of climate change at the South Pole. And then a year later, in 2008, as a New York Foundation for the Arts sponsored artist, Mr. Cortada planted a green flag at the North Pole to reclaim it for nature and launch an eco-art reforestation effort. And with those efforts, he was able to create art at both the North and South Poles to address environmental concerns, and through his career, his art efforts have been directed at many of the points in between those two poles. Over the past 3 decades, Mr. Cortada has created more than 150 artworks, installations, collaborative murals, and socially engaged projects in the public space. Please join me in welcoming artist and environmentalist Xavier Cortada to the Muscarelle Museum.
Truth matters. It is a beacon that guides us, but at times it gets obstructed I'm honored to be here with you, David, at the Muscarelle Museum to talk a little bit about my practice and to explore what truth means, particularly in today's time. And it's relevant that I'm doing this in a museum. Art is a vessel for truth. And art doesn't just celebrate what is. I think art illuminates what is hidden. And that is because beautiful art doesn't just sit there. It stirs, it provokes, it reveals, and it allows us to reclaim truths. And it does so because of the coherence of beauty. Even a painful conversation between two individuals can be beautiful. And its beauty comes from its honesty. Just like in a complex scientific formula, the fact that there is this pattern, this structure now revealed, brings beauty. Like an ecosystem, all working through the lifelong process of life and evolution on this planet. Its coherence creates beauty, and that, ultimately, is truth. But when it comes to climate, I'm not sure that we're really telling the truth. There's an incredible dissonance between what is and what is being displayed. In fact, more than a climate of crisis, it's a climate of a narrative, of an understanding, of an empathy, of love, of connection. And the beauty of art is that it can help us see beyond that. It can help us imagine differently, reframe what is, bring understanding. Earlier today, the strongest hurricane of the year, the most powerful one to ever hit this Caribbean island nation, just south of my parents' homeland, hit as a Category 5 that days before had no business being called a hurricane. And it did so because at 5 miles an hour, slow motion for a hurricane. It moved across 200-foot deep waters that were 86 degrees. It moved through the fuel that turned it from a no-name storm into the most intense of hurricanes. And if you're looking at the news, you're seeing this happen more often. These hurricanes that out of nowhere become Category 5s. And you see these slow churning hurricanes like what we witnessed with Hurricane Harvey in Houston years back, just sitting upon a community and drenching it and flooding it and drowning it. You see this kind of hurricane, a Category 5, with Maria in Puerto Rico. You've seen the impacts of hurricanes. You saw the impossibility of Helene coming into North Carolina, destroying Asheville and so many other places. Things that were unexpected. But somehow, in this spectacle that we have created in society, the truth that our planet is warming, the truth that our addiction to fossil fuels, our pollution, the carbon that we are emitting, and the regulations that we are ridding are contributing to these catastrophes. We are living in a world where more and more we are seeing the human impacts of climate. We're seeing droughts and wildfires like we had never seen before. We're seeing the vectors of disease come to the subtropics because the subtropics are now as warm as the tropics that had those vectors that will bring the new pandemics into our societies. And it is here and it is now, but the truth somehow isn't landing. You'd expect in a democracy for government to be able to convey these truths, to use the apparatus of an ordered society, a democratic process, a bully pulpit, to help converge all of the innovation, all of the technology, all of the businesses for society to solve a problem that hurts its people. But instead, the truth that isn't being revealed is that government is facilitating the further polluting of our planet. And it does so by denying climate. It does so by literally scrubbing decades of database, that longitudinal studies that researchers have been doing across the planet, telling us, calculating, assessing the climate risk to our lives and the lives of our grandchildren. That data is being scrubbed. And careers of scientists, experts in the field, are being sidelined and instead favoring those who deny climate in favor of industries that continue to pollute. In fact, there's a prioritization to the fossil fuel industry at the expense of all those of us who suffer the consequences of a more polluted environment. It is so dire that the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine took the unprecedented act of having 1,900 of its members write a letter to the American people in March. And in this letter, they spoke about the dismantling of the scientific enterprise. If this nation was known for one thing, it was for its ability to innovate, for its strength in engineering and science. Everything from the smartphone you own to the incredible applied science in every other aspect of our lives happens because of that ingenuity, because of the academic freedom, because of the ability for scientists not to worry about their grants being denied because of the words written on them. But the truths go beyond government. The truth is that they happen every day in our lives. We see it with the false choices that are presented in front of us, that we have to choose between a healthy planet and a thriving economy, when that is not the case. There's enough ingenuity and innovation to be able to move us to pivot away from a dirty economy to one with green economy, with one where new jobs and new possibilities that don't pollute our lives and our planets can exist. But again, that truth somehow is hidden from us. We feel like a dependence, like we can't live without plastics, or we can't live without fossil fuels. And it's one that is perpetuated by greenwashing. I don't know how many of you have been sick of these commercials that show everything being beautiful, portraying a natural landscape, and that there's one of the largest polluters, name polluter of your choice, whether it's the concrete industry or the fossil fuel industry, doing its part in helping save our planet, while at the same time lobbying and pushing for not just regulations that make it easier, more cost-effective for them to continue business as usual, but to guilting you into thinking that you're the problem, into guilting you and thinking that it's because you consume the thing that our systems create and you have no other choice but to use, that by your use of the product that they, in an unregulated fashion, allow to get to your shelves, it is somehow your fault. Beauty that distracts us from an injustice, no matter how aesthetically pleasing it may be, is counterfeit. It, in many ways, is just cosmetic. And sadly, too many in our profession, in order to put light on a topic that is dire, miss the mark by just focusing on the beauty instead of helping us have a profound understanding of the problem. And the biggest deception, I believe, isn't what government does to us or what businesses do to us. It is what we do to ourselves. It's in our inability to believe in ourselves. It's in our ability to be able to imagine a world that isn't impacted by the catastrophe that befalls us today. To give up on ourselves, on our progeny, on our planet. It is our inability to understand that in our own hands, we have the solution. That we have the creativity, that we can tap into our own energy and connect with one another for the better public good. But so many social factors, the spectacle that society has created that forces us not to create but to consume, to be passive instead of activated, to chill out with Netflix instead of creating our own story, right? To not believe that we can partner with our neighbors to go down to our town hall and actually make a difference, to believe that all is lost. That is the biggest lie. That is the biggest untruth. That is the biggest challenge. And what I, for decades, have been trying to do through art is to wake in us our ability to love, to connect, to feel and understand that we are part of something bigger than ourselves, and that we don't need to consume all this stuff to make us happier. We just need to belong. So a lot of the art I do is to emulate that, is to try to create processes that show people a different way. And I take ideas that are commonplace, ideas that are normal in society, like planting a tree, planting a native tree for biodiversity, and I add an extra edge or layer to it as a way of catalyzing action and conversation. So I don't know how many of you are parts of a native plant society and how tired you are of planting native plants that no one else is planting. So I create this conspicuous thing. I put this green flag next to the plant so that now when your aunt shows up, she'll actually notice that there's a new thing called a tree in the front lawn. But that green flag, in my way, was part of a global campaign that I started where we've planted thousands of trees, not for the sake of planting trees, because arborists plant trees, but for the sense of creating artists, people who were now reverse conquistadores. They were literally planting the flag of nature into what was once wilderness and reclaiming that wilderness for nature. They would plant a green flag that said, I hereby reclaim this land for nature in their front yard, and encourage their neighbors to do the same. Giving people a sense of agency, that they had some role or something to do. Of course, in the process of getting the green flag, they would learn about the ecosystem services that plants bring biodiversity. For those areas that are flooded, the roots of plants absolutely capture all of that excess water rapidly. For those areas that are suffering from heat, the shade cast by the plants help cool urban spaces down, particularly places where people can't afford air conditioning. And all of a sudden, the really most important part isn't that you're creating this new habitat for a migrating bird, is that you are allowing an individual who thought she had no role to do something by providing her with a platform to be the subject matter expert on that block, letting others know about it. That ability to take your own voice, your own creativity, and communicate it with others is how we unlock these hidden truths. Because it's not some expert talking to you, it's your next door neighbor. Art also allows us to see the invisible. This is Miami Beach. This is a barrier island. This is a mangrove forest. Check out the roseate spoonbill, the American crocodile, the blue heron. Well, they used to be there. They're no longer there. Because the only way to grow mangroves at this Starbucks is on an artificial life support system that I created, this vertical grid. Those little green things that look like cigars, those are mangrove propagules. And they would normally be at that elevation or that height had a bulldozer not destroyed it to create Miami Beach. And the problem is that in society, we don't see what is missing. We just see a beautiful place with neon and movie stars, not realizing that this was an ecosystem once before, and a rather important one. It was a barrier island to protect the mainland from hurricanes. But now, it's nothing but concrete and neon. So I created a process where I would work with volunteers to collect mangrove propagules as an artistic process, as a performative piece. I would walk city dwellers into a mangrove forest. That act alone, the idea of bringing someone into nature, would have been enough, but I took it a step further. Through the process of immersing them, of learning and working together, these volunteers began to understand the value of this ecosystem that was, in a derogatory way, called a swamp, or something that was dispensable. Instead, those vertical nurseries were planted not just on Lincoln Road, but soon our science museum loved the idea, and we created an 1,100 permanent, because every year they would be taken down and planted, vertical nursery at the Science Museum. And the process of infiltrating a science museum with an eco-art project allowed the Science Museum to transform its culture so that instead of passively showing dioramas of nature, it created a program called Museum Volunteers for the Environment, where the museum visitors would plant upland species as part of their museum experience. And that is a transformative power of art. You're not just here to passively gaze at something, good or bad. You have the power in you to transform, to do. When I went to, and the part I didn't tell you about, of course, is, well, how did they get from, the mangrove forest into the stores? I then had the volunteers literally go into each of the stores and talk to the baristas and explain to them that they were in a mangrove forest and that we wanted to put these things on their window. And then there were these cards and websites that allowed a visitor to talk to a barista about the ecology of a place that neither of them knew anything about prior to a volunteer who, prior to connecting with me, knew nothing about. So I was creating different layers of eco-emissaries. And what allowed for all of that to happen? This thing called art. This idea that you were doing something bigger than yourself, that you were part of something larger than yourself, that you had purpose. So you weren't going into a store to consume plastics. You were going into a store to plant coastlines. And we planted 25 acres of those coastlines. At around the time that all of this was happening, I get a letter from the National Science Foundation telling me, congrats. We finally decided to accept your fellowship to go to Antarctica. And when you get one of these fellowships, you're what they call a co-principal investigator. I'm sorry, yeah, a PI. I wasn't a co-PI, I was the PI. You're a principal investigator, and you're there on your research mission. Your research mission is to create all these installations. So I cared a lot about climate issues. I wasn't an expert on them. I was just intrigued enough. The mangroves did that to me. Prior to planting mangroves, I was working on a bunch of issues dealing with the other woes that Miami was facing before I saw the destruction of a mangrove forest on my way to the Florida Keys in 2006. For decades before that, I was dealing with other things being mowed down, like children due to gun violence, or victims of cancer or AIDS. So a lot of the work I did, not just in Miami, but all over the world prior to that, were message murals at international AIDS conferences, or working with street children in Bolivia. There were all these other projects that I was creating, and most of what I did was painting. These very beautiful, bold painters, as my dad and uncle were both painters, so those tropical palettes found their way into my hand, first as an 8-year-old art critic, telling them how to paint, and then eventually as the guy who was holding the paintbrush. So this whole tradition of using art to communicate ideas about society, not necessarily environmental ones, was something that I landed in Antarctica with as I went there to create these installations and these huge paintings I thought I was going to create. But as a PI, as a principal investigator, you get to share the bunker with all the other PIs who aren't there to paint. They're there to do high-level science research. And in those conversations, brushing our teeth in our communal bathroom, sharing the mess hall with them, they told me about their science, about the Western Antarctic ice sheet, and about the science behind their work. And they literally showed me pieces of ice that they said would eventually melt and drown the only place I ever called home, Miami. And that's a truth I had to reveal. I had a responsibility in my hand. So in Antarctica, they give you, it looks like an army base, right? These metal bunkers, they're semicircular. And then they give you the lab where the scientists work when they're not working there. So I inhabited a science lab. Over the windows, I saw these transantarctic mountains. And in front of me, I had asked these scientists to give me samples of their work. So I took these pieces of ice and I put them on pieces of paper. They were sketch paper. Thank God they were archival, but they were just sketch paper. I wasn't planning to create these wonderful ice paintings. And I took some of the paint I was going to use to create my paintings of Shackleton and the explorers, and I melted it on that ice. And as I saw that ice melt, I looked at those mountains outside my window. Those mountains were in front of me on a 9x12 piece of paper. I was literally painting Antarctica with Antarctica, given to me by Antarctic scientists. And I just had that ice melt. And the pieces weren't really about Antarctica. They were about where Antarctica was going. They were about how this piece was the precursor of the horror that the place where my family went to as climate refugees was going to create more climate refugees by an external force called climate change. I used these pieces in exhibits. I gave them to governors. I did everything I could to let people understand how dire the situation was in Miami. And eventually, I decided to use these pieces as part of a participatory art piece that I called the Underwater Homeowners Association. See, the paintings were about melting Antarctica, and that's the backdrop of these yard signs. It's a picture of Antarctica melting. And then there's a little line at the bottom with rising water. And the idea was that if Antarctica melted to the level of feet that that number on your yard sign had, your home would be underwater. Because that number, using an app that you will all use in a few minutes, you could type in your address and it would tell you how many feet above sea level your home was. So it was an exercise where I was revealing the truth of your climate vulnerability, but importantly, doing it in a way that was personal to you. It wasn't about the polar bears in the Arctic or the penguins in the Antarctic. It wasn't about some South Pacific island. It was about your property, your greatest asset, the equity that you owned. And it asked you to have the audacity and the courage to tell the truth about your vulnerability. And because you did that, your neighbor noticed and asked, what's that number 8 doing on your lawn? I mean, it's not a for sale sign. It's not vote for governor, right? It just says 8. It piques your curiosity. You're curious, what the heck is this thing on my front neighbor's yard? It's an invitation to have a conversation with someone who maybe voted on the wrong side of the ballot compared to you. But now you have a commonality that makes that right. Because it's about your shared interest. It's about not polarizing, but convening. That process had thousands, just to imagine this for a second, thousands of yard signs across a community that was in denial about sea level rise. It made the talk about sea level rise impossible to ignore. I then asked children in schools to paint the elevation of the intersections of the community so that they too could be the eco-emissaries. So we had an app, we mapped out the intersection, we figured out what the intersection was. I went to the art classroom, I spoke to the art teacher, I spoke to the kids, I told the kids they were the architects of their future, let's do something about it. Everyone showed up on a Saturday morning and there we were painting elevation markers across the intersections of Miami. And we did that on an east to west fashion because I wanted the community to understand that just because you're inland doesn't mean you're safer. Because our topography is one that has ridges. And because we have this thing called the second coastline, the Everglades, on the western side of the urban space. And because we have a third coastline called the aquifer, where we get our fresh drinking water that will get salinated with rising seas. So all of a sudden, this conversation became a more truthful one. It wasn't just about skyscrapers and buildings and more and more and more. It was about there's a real vulnerability that we have here when it comes to climate. That process led to another project, one where I worked with the second largest polluter in the planet, which is the concrete industry. Because they have to have purity in the concrete so that the rebar doesn't rust, it takes a lot of energy to create the cement and the aggregates so that our buildings don't collapse. But there's a process called sustainable concrete where you make the rebar out of fiberglass. And it doesn't matter what impurities. In fact, you can reuse rubble to make your sustainable concrete. So through art, I'm now trying to create a process where I put the same yard signs, except they're made out of concrete, as permanent markers that go in every single one of our county parks. 251 public parks. Because there is nothing more public than a public card. You don't even need a library card to get in. You just walk into the park. And you show up at the park, and you see this weird thing with a number 5 on it, and you wonder, what is this number 5? And you look at the QR code, and before you know it, you're in a conversation about the elevation of that park. And you begin wondering, well, what's the truth about the elevation of my property just down the street? So it becomes a catalyst for communities to talk about something that was hidden. I see several of you, not all of you, but thank you, several of you who have white hair, or like me, no hair, or no hair and white hair. And what this project did is also, in a way I wasn't expecting, provided an opportunity for those of us who are older to find renewed purpose. One of the parks was in a community that had a little bit of a higher elevation. It was at 9 feet above sea level. That sounds low to you, but in Miami, our highest point is 20 feet. So if you're sitting at 9 feet, and scientists tell us that by the end of this decade, if we do business as usual, and we're doing worse than business as usual, we could expect 7 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century, up to 7 feet of sea level rise by the end of the century. So developers have begun coming and gentrifying this historic black community. And the elders who I spoke to at the park as we installed this marker outside their park finally had the truth revealed as to why their property all of a sudden was being targeted with new development, why some of their neighbors were being displaced. And it recharged them with that same sense of purpose that they recounted in our community meetings about their work when they were younger in the civil rights movement. It helped them understand how they had been working together to solve problems and were once again able to come together to solve those problems. Again, the power of art, not just to communicate, to do data visualization, but to convene, transform, reimagine, inspire. Civic groups, government groups have done it as well, taking the underwater campaign and wrapping buses with it in Broward County to communicate that idea with that QR code going around so that communities understood their vulnerability. And of course, this is important for the public servants who do want to do good because they need a vocal citizenry to back them if they're going to enact policies that will prevent the flooding from happening. And of course, I also work within the art sector because I am an artist. So here I am outside Art Basel. Some of you may know Art Basel as this huge hemispheric event with the largest carbon footprint known to mankind because everyone shows up on their private jet. But nonetheless, a few feet away from here was the Untitled Fair, one of the big art fairs. And people are walking away with, $40,000 paintings. And just a few feet away, I'm reminding them in my own little tent what the elevation of this community is and what the climate vulnerability is. The ability to use art to unlock these truths, to bring it to spaces like the chambers of the county commission, where all the policy and regulations, including zoning and building and permits, take place. And to put a marker with the elevation of that county hall, outside the county hall, is how we begin to reveal the truths. And of course, the campaign goes viral when you take it to schools. Just this past couple of years, we've taken it to 16 high schools and middle schools across Broward County, where I start with a group of eco-emissaries, 100 students, where we give them the exact lecture you just received. Well, not exact. And then we marshal them by having them create their own yard signs with their own elevations to put at home. And we create a mural marking the elevation of their school and give them the ability to tell the other 1,200 or 3,400, depending on the size of the school, students what it is about. Because every single student I spoke with will live to see this calamity unless we begin to work together to do something about it. And they go home and they put this in their front yards and they begin to tell the neighbors to do the same. This is the way we begin to tell the truth. This is the way we begin to co-create, to use art, this universal language our ancestors taught us, in the way they meant for us to use it. Not as commodity, not to tell people how wealthy you are or what kind of good taste you have, but instead to talk about the beauty in you. And I would like to give you the opportunity to show the beauty in you by revealing the elevation of your home. So at this time, I'm going to ask help to distribute some yard signs. Congratulations, you're getting an Xavier Cortada art piece right here now for the price of $0. It's my way of collaborating with you. So one of my Antarctic ice paintings are coming with you. And just go to that QR code and type your address. And that address should reveal how many feet above sea level your home is. And then what I want you to do is write that number as an integer. Don't use decimals. I don't think I'm giving you decimals in the app. Just as an integer. So we've rounded up the number. So you can see how many feet above sea level your home is. And then I want you to, in the way that best depicts you and your style, and we have time to do this. I'm going to let you do this throughout the Q&A, and then we'll take a big picture together after the Q&A with your signs. But I want you to use the markers we're giving you to draw your elevation there. And just think about this as an opportunity. I know you all, most of you, I think all of you, live in southeastern Virginia. All of you know the flooding. All of you know the consequences of climate. The consequences impact you whether you're at 25 feet or at 3 feet. Because imagine yourself living at 30 feet, but all the tax base that supports the regional activity that allows you to live at 30 feet is now worthless. So all the government services that would have hauled your garbage or built your roads or provided you with clean water are subject to a lower tax base. The beauty of this project is that it allows you to connect with your neighbor, understand the urgency, understanding that there will be winners and losers in the short term, but eventually, unless we act, we all lose. The other thing that happens here, it allows you to be ready. It allows you to understand the vulnerability you have so you can advocate. And I think the biggest gift is this. In a world that would be impressed with the designer paint that you use for your front lawn, or the mark of the vehicle that goes in your front lawn to give you the status, the world that sadly I think we have built and bought into ourselves, I think this project begins to crack the veneer that allows you to be yourself, that allows you to understand that your biggest life purpose is to make sure that your child doesn't live in a world that has more pandemics, extreme heat, and unpredictable weather. That your true happiness comes from understanding that you were part of a solution and not victimized by inaction. So think of this sort of like planting that green flag in your front lawn and saying, I reclaim this wilderness for nature. Think of this as you reclaiming yourselves as the individuals that can not just look at art, but can create art and can create a difference. Looking at the QR codes, you'll see that this is part of the underwater. And this young man that's walking over there, Adam Roberti, leads my foundation, which is responsible for advancing the underwater. And you'll see that that platform is more than just a base for knowledge. It is an invitation to learn more. And the app tells you about things you can do, policymakers you can write to, and especially for those that are just starting in the process, the organizations that you can join so that you too can begin to advance your ways of tapping into your own creativity to allow others to see the reality and, more importantly, to try to change it. I'm going to let you continue drawing on your markers. There's not going to be a prize for the prettiest marker or the lowest elevation, but I kind of want us all to see it, so we'll just put it up and have you turn it around, and maybe we'll take a couple of pictures just so we can see what the collective elevation of the audience was. So we'll do that afterwards, but before, because we're still drawing, right? Many people are still drawing, or are we pretty close? Adam, are there a lot of pens still writing, or are people most? Yeah. So I want you to take your time. I'll take this moment to before we close it up, just to thank you for participating. Don't clap because you're too busy drawing. It's okay. And maybe, David, you can join me up here and talk a little bit about, ask some questions or whatever.
Yes, so we'd love to have questions from the audience. Before we get started with taking questions from the audience, I'm going to ask you a question,
Sure,
Xavier. Can you tell us a little bit, so I know from your talk you're very focused in on South Florida, but I know you've also spent a lot of time across the state of Florida. Can you speak a little bit about some of the other communities you've talked to and what your message has been?
Sure. So I've spoken with different groups. Among them is the Association of Public Art Professionals, in which I try to encourage them to use public art, the commissioned public art pieces, as a way of expanding this. So as an artist, part of my role is to model this, but I'm also trying to help transform the way our cultural sector addresses it. Another group I have spoken to are schools and children and museums and societies. Just north of us in Broward County, the Broward County government and their public art departments has actually commissioned me to bring this project into their community because they see the resource and the value of doing that. So Miami was an artist trying to get his neighbors to notice. In Broward County, it's county government trying to build constituencies to do the work. Going to Tampa, I went to Tampa Prep. It's a school up in Tampa, trying to get their students and their communities to do the same. So in everywhere you go, you try to work with the community to make it happen. But sometimes you're not listened to. So one cool little project like this, it'll take 2 seconds, was I went to 50, Adam, was it 54? I think it was 54. I went to 54 city halls across the state of Florida. And I used the app and found the elevation of each one of those 54 city halls. And I hand drew one of those markers you have in your hand and put it in that city hall. And I called that project Underwater Florida. That happened just a couple of months before the hurricane that went through Fort Myers, the same one that Charlie had gone through 10 years earlier, to try to tell the people who sit in that dais, in that city hall, where I put the marker, that the decisions they make around growth and development in Florida have consequences on the future people who sit on that dais. So as an artist, I try to use everything in my arsenal. Over here in this PowerPoint alone, you've seen me do it with social media, with apps, with ceramics, with metal, and mostly with my favorite medium, which is people, to advance those ideas. And sometimes you have to be a little bit clandestine, right? Like just putting a marker that no one invited you to put in front of a city hall.
So we're open to questions. Just raise your hand if you'd like the microphone. But in the meantime, I see a couple of hands back there. I'm going to ask one more question.
Sure.
I've seen your body of work. It's amazing. It's oftentimes sculptural, oftentimes tall. It looks like mosaics, sort of three-dimensional mosaics. Can you describe some of those projects?
Sure. So I get funded to do this because I create public art. So basically, I'm kind of being funny about it, but I mean, a lot of the work I do, I basically self-fund, and I give the money to the foundation, and the money comes from public art commissions, you know. And to create a public art commission, it has to be durable, it has to withstand the elements, so I make them out of ceramics. As a kid, I was a painter. I learned how to paint, and I paint. But now I needed to paint for outdoors, and you know, if you put a canvas painting in the rain, it's going to peel and fade. So I started painting on ceramics. So I started creating these ceramic murals, and then I needed a surface to put these murals on, so some of them became three-dimensional. But each and every one of those pieces bring you back. So every one of the works, the one called Diatom Fountain outside an elderly center, it's about the channeling of the Everglades. And the other one called Flower Force, it's about planting pollinators. And what I do with the public art is I take some of the pieces in the actual structure and I give it to my neighbors. And the planting pollinators, 200 neighbors got 200 ceramic flowers along with a wildflower plant that they would plant in their front yard, just like the big sculpture at the center of the community. The idea was that I was trying to blur the lines between the public and the private. So although I look at different media, in this case, ceramics because of the functionality, all that matters to me is the connection with community and to allow the art to allow you to tap into your own creativity to transform yourself. So that's basically the thing. And there's different genres and different works, but if you see it, they all have a same thread. And that's a thread that looks at the power of art to transform.
What is your opinion on nuclear energy?
A little bit louder, please.
What's your opinion on nuclear energy?
On nuclear energy, I see its efficiency, right? It doesn't pollute today. I think there are incredible harms that can befall us. I live in Miami. Miami has its cooling channels on Biscayne Bay. Sea level rise is going to make the nuclear power plant obsolete unless a hurricane hits it first. So I think that we have to proceed with extreme caution. Here's the good news. I'm not an expert, right? So I don't want to come here, and my opinion shouldn't matter to you. I think what should matter to you is this. Yours. Your opinion should matter. And that opinion should be informed. So you care about nuclear energy. So my challenge to you is to find ways to hone in on that opinion by asking people like me, but also experts in the field, and to look at not just what the experts in the field who get paid to create nuclear energy do, but by those who are normally silent. Right now we have a horrible thing happening called the pollution of microplastics across our land. I was just at Aspen Institute on a national strategy for natural water strategy for our nation. And in the room, you had all the leaders, right, of the water industry trying to address water. There are voices in policy centers, in legislatures, in rooms, that are the people who are ultimately impacted. Now, clearly, people impacted by nuclear energy are those that will not suffer carbon going in the atmosphere. But the extraction caused by nuclear energy, right, the extraction, and then the nuclear pollution, what happens to that, what community gets to get those radioactive materials when it's time to discard them. Those are big, big issues. And I think what I want to challenge all of us to do, that was part of the third truth I was talking about, is that we feel that others, that broader society, that it's someone else's problem to solve the climate crisis or the nuclear crisis. I believe that the more we shine light on something and the more that the body politic is informed and aware of the consequences, that we don't get duped because we understand the issue, that we understand the consequences, then we're going to collectively make better decisions. And I know we have an election 7 days away and another one in 2026 and another one in 2028. But what I do fear is that our nation, our community, our society isn't given the space to think about and create those decisions. That those decisions become knee-jerk responses based on who you're ideologically aligned with, that you don't let truth come into the equation. And to me, it's really, really important for us as a society to begin to see ourselves as fellow human beings on one journey who all care for one another, and we just have to hold each other accountable to find those truths. So thank you for believing that I have a smart answer to your question. The truth is that you have a smarter answer, and I think that answer resides in you. The good news, too, is that you may not be, you look a little younger than I do, which means you have many more years to come to that answer. Thank you for asking.
Other questions?
Thank you. The things you're talking about seem so empowering and so positive and so forward-looking. And I was just wondering, are you getting much pushback from the state government in Florida?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard, but I think as a social practitioner, your biggest vehicle is relationship building. And there's different ways of being a social practitioner, right? A social justice artist can be very confrontational and protest, just to scream so that you are listened to. Sadly, in our society, there's a lot of that screaming, so we scream at each other and we don't communicate to one another. My brand of work is really an uplifting one that is about bringing people together. I speak the truth. You have not seen me hold back on what I think about climate and what our government is doing. But the processes I create aren't here to disarm you. They're to help you understand and bring you in. The fact that I am in public schools in the state of Florida talking about climate is, I shouldn't say this too loud, but is unbelievable, candidly. Right? It's true. But the reason I can do that is because I am really talking about leadership. I'm really talking about art. I'm not trying to be antagonistic. I'm trying to find solutions. And I believe that if in everything we do, we have that approach, right? That you're not just trying to score some wins, you're actually trying to accomplish something, then you're going to do it. And for the younger people in the room, there's this reputational success that you build, right? So I remember, I don't have wealth, I am not funded by big anything, right? But after a while, you get to be known as someone that does something in a certain way, and that builds upon itself. So that you can, little by little, begin to develop a way of doing things. And if it resonates, others will follow. And in time, I think you'll begin to make impact. So I've been doing this since I was in high school. I'm a little older now, right? So over 40 years being in the same place, not parachuting, right? Like being in a place, building something, you learn together and you work together. But yes, I will speak to you truthfully. I am troubled that a state defined by water does not understand its vulnerability to sea level rise. A state that does not have a tax base that can handle this. It doesn't have an income tax. It has a property tax and a sales tax, which means tourism. Tell me if you're going to come to Florida if it is literally sinking. And property values, which are going to drop as the water rises, puts us in a very fragile situation. And what I want to do is help my fellow Floridians before the problem solving becomes chaos. Tomorrow morning, Jamaica is going to wake up to the kind of horror it hasn't witnessed. It did some rebuilding to prepare for hurricanes after the last one, but it's nowhere ready to where it is today. The kind of chaos that they are going to witness tomorrow is the kind of chaos that our nation will witness with sea level rise when the water rises at every place that land touches water. Period. And just imagine the catastrophic impact of that if we just keep our heads in the sand. So yes, I think it's imperative for all of us. And the reason I speak at museums, the reason I try to inspire artists is because all of us need to be creative problem solvers in that cause.
Well, Xavier Cortada, thank you very much for bringing your enlightened and energetic approach to change to the Muscarelle. So I'll just say one more thing before you leave. If you need to stop by, the Muscarelle Cafe is open until 6:30. The team has stayed there in case anybody has any needs. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to come up to the front of the room and ask our great artist and guest your question that you have. And then
There's one last thing with that. So back there, Adam is holding up a yard sign. I know it's a beautiful, oh, wait a minute, we need a picture of everyone. Can everyone hold their yard sign up, please, this way? And can we get the cameras? I want to see what the elevations are. Hey, can we turn on the lights? Thank you. Look at this. Thank you. Well, I'm a little hopeful. These are not Miami numbers. All right, there are some low-lying, hello, number 6, and there's some really hot numbers like 168. And 187, and 266, hello. But I do see the 10s, the 7s, yeah, these are, oh my God, 199, thank God. So thank you for sharing those numbers with us. We have these metal yardsticks. Please take them with you. They're right here. You just put them at the bottom of your sign, like a sign, and put them in your front yard. And if you put them between now and Tuesday, you'll confuse a lot of people. All right, thank you so much. Thank you, David.